The wind whispered through the tall pines as Elena walked along the forest path, her boots crunching over dry leaves and brittle twigs. The sky above was a muted gray, heavy with the promise of rain, and the air carried the faint scent of moss and earth. After years of a life filled with expectations, betrayals, and hollow promises, she finally found herself alone, with no one to answer to, but the voice inside her own head. She had not intended to wander so far, but something about the forest called to her, an almost forgotten instinct that pulled her toward the edge of the kingdom. That's when she saw it, a small cabin, hidden among wild vines and tall grass, half collapsed but stubbornly standing. Its wooden walls were cracked and weathered, the roof sagging under the weight of decades. Windows were boarded up, but a thin crack in the wood allowed the faintest glimpse of shadowed emptiness inside. Elena paused at the edge of the clearing, her chest tightening with an unexpected mixture of curiosity and longing. This place was forgotten, abandoned, much like she had felt for the past few years. Yet, in its decay, she saw a possibility. She could restore it, make it hers, and perhaps in doing so, she could restore herself as well. The first days were quiet, filled only with the sounds of the forest. She worked tirelessly, clearing the overgrown weeds, hammering broken boards back into place, and patching the roof where the rain had made tiny holes. Every swing of her hammer, every stroke of her brush, felt like she was not just fixing the cabin, but rebuilding a part of herself that she had thought was lost forever. By evening, she would sit on the porch, watching the mist creep across the river nearby. The sun, when it peeked through the clouds, set the water aglow in soft gold, and she sometimes felt that the river was alive, carrying away the shadows of her past. She was careful to keep to herself, speaking only to the birds and the occasional deer that came close enough to watch her work. Yet the cabin was not entirely silent. On the first night, as she arranged some old furniture she had found in a nearby barn, she noticed strange carvings in the walls, symbols she could not recognize, lines and shapes that seemed to pulse faintly when she touched them. A shiver ran down her spine. It was as if the cabin itself remembered something ancient, some power long forgotten. Elena shook her head and tried to dismiss the feeling. There were no ghosts here, no curses. Just wood, stone, and memories of a time when this place had been alive. Still, the symbols lingered in her mind, and she often caught herself glancing at them when the wind howled through the trees at night. She began keeping a small fire in the hearth, which gave the cabin a sense of warmth and security she had not felt in years. Nights were still restless, filled with dreams she could not explain. Sometimes she dreamed of a tall, dark figure watching her from the edge of the forest, silent, waiting. Other nights she dreamed of wolves with eyes like molten gold, their shadows stretching across the forest floor, following her even into her dreams. The villagers she occasionally passed on her way to the cabin whispered about a ruler called the Alpha King, a man of immense power who had ruled the forest and the surrounding lands for as long as anyone could remember. They spoke in hushed tones, as if saying his name aloud might summon him from the shadows. "The king does not forgive easily," one old woman had warned, "and those who cross him disappear." Elena did not know what to make of such stories. She was not a person who sought danger. Yet even as she worked to restore the cabin, she felt a strange connection to the forest, as though it was watching her, testing her, perhaps even protecting her. She could not explain why, but every step she took toward repairing the cabin seemed to be guided by an unseen hand, gentle yet insistent. Days turned into weeks. Elena began to find small treasures hidden around the cabin, an old chest with rusted hinges, a book with pages of faded ink, a silver locket with no photo inside. Each item told a story she did not yet understand, pieces of a past long buried beneath layers of dust and neglect. With every discovery, she felt a faint stirring of hope. Perhaps she could make a life here, one where she belonged to no one but herself. One morning, as sunlight filtered through the mist, she noticed fresh footprints near the edge of the clearing. They were large, like no animal she had seen before, and they led from the forest toward the cabin, but then disappeared into the trees again. Her heart beat faster, a mixture of fear and curiosity tightening her chest. She wanted to believe it was just a deer or some wild animal, but deep down, a part of her feared it was something else. Even as the days grew longer and the cabin took shape, a restlessness grew within her. She felt a presence in the forest, patient and powerful, as if the trees themselves held their breath whenever she stepped outside. Sometimes, when the wind shifted just right, she thought she could hear a voice, low and distant, calling her name. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the trees and the sky bled into shades of red and purple, she lit the hearth and settled into the small chair she had placed by the window. She sipped a cup of tea, listening to the rain tapping against the roof. And then she heard it. A knock, deliberate and heavy, echoing through the cabin with the weight of authority. Her heart leapt into her throat. She froze, staring at the door, unsure if she should answer. Who could possibly come here? She had told no one of this place, had spoken to no one beyond the occasional nod to the villagers miles away. And yet, the knock came again, insistent, demanding. She moved toward the door slowly, her fingers trembling as she grasped the handle. Outside, the storm had grown fiercer, and rain lashed against the wooden walls, turning the world beyond the cabin into a blur of gray and green. When she finally opened the door, a figure filled the threshold. Tall, broad, and imposing, he seemed to command the forest itself. His dark hair clung to his face from the rain, and his eyes shone with an intensity that made her heart skip. Even standing in silence, he exuded power and authority, a presence that made the air around her feel heavier. "I am Kale," the man said, his voice low and firm, carrying the weight of centuries. "I've come for what belongs to me." Elena stepped back instinctively. "You must have the wrong place," she said, her voice trembling but defiant. "This cabin has been empty for years." Kyle's eyes softened for just a moment, a flicker of something unreadable passing over his features. Then his gaze sharpened again. "It is not just a cabin," he said, almost to himself. "It is more than that, and you have awakened it." Elena frowned. "Awakened it? I don't understand." "You will," he said, stepping closer, his presence overwhelming yet magnetic. "The forest does not forgive ignorance, and neither do I." Her pulse raced, a mixture of fear and fascination coursing through her veins. She wanted to slam the door, to run into the night and hide, yet something in her refused to move. There was a strange recognition in his gaze, a sense that their fates had been tied long before either of them could understand. Kale did not force his way in, but he did not leave. He simply stood there, the rain dripping from his shoulders, watching her with an intensity that made the air between them crackle. It was a warning, a promise, and an invitation all at once. Elena realized, with a shiver she could not explain, that her life had changed the moment she restored the cabin. The quiet solitude she had so desperately sought was gone. In its place was something larger, darker, and utterly compelling. Something that would demand everything she had, and perhaps everything she was willing to give. As the storm raged outside, she felt the first flicker of a strange hope. Perhaps in facing this mysterious man and the power he carried, she could not only protect the cabin, but also reclaim herself, piece by piece. And yet, as Kale finally stepped back into the shadows of the forest, letting the wind carry his presence like a living shadow, Elena could not shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. Something ancient had awakened, something that would not rest until it had claimed its due. The cabin, once a sanctuary of solitude, had become a threshold. And beyond it lay a world she had never dared to imagine, a world of power, curses, and a connection that could either heal her or consume her entirely. She closed the door slowly, her hands trembling. The storm outside mirrored the storm within her heart, wild and unpredictable. And in the distance, the forest seemed to whisper a single word, carried on the wind. Choose. Elena sat by the hearth that night, staring into the flames, knowing deep down that her choice had already been made. The forest, the cabin, and the man who had appeared on her doorstep had intertwined their fates, and nothing would ever be the same again. The morning after the storm, Elena awoke to the soft gray light spilling through the cabin windows. The wind still whispered through the trees, carrying the scent of rain-soaked earth and moss. Her mind, however, was filled with the memory of the man who had appeared at her door, Kyle, the Alpha King. She could not forget the weight of his presence, the intensity in his eyes, or the strange, almost magnetic pull she had felt. She moved quietly around the cabin, making tea and checking the repairs she had made the day before. The forest outside seemed alive, almost aware of her thoughts. Birds called softly, and the river murmured in the distance. Yet beneath this ordinary morning, she felt an undercurrent of something larger, something dangerous. Kyle was not just a man. He carried with him the forest itself, the wildness and the power that could bend nature to his will. She tried to push the memory of him from her mind, but it was impossible. Her thoughts returned again and again to the way he had spoken, to the strange acknowledgement in his gaze, as if he had recognized something in her that she had long forgotten herself. Hours passed, and she went about her work, repairing the cabin, sanding the wood, and sweeping the porch. She tried to focus on the rhythm of her tasks, but every sound of the forest made her glance up, half expecting to see him standing at the edge of the trees. She told herself that he would not come back, that perhaps he had merely been passing through, curious about the forest, or perhaps drawn by the magic hidden in the cabin. But as evening approached, the familiar sense of tension returned. The forest darkened with shadows, and the wind carried a note of warning, like a distant growl. She was arranging firewood when she saw movement through the trees. He stepped into the clearing, tall, dark, and commanding. His wet hair clung to his face, and his eyes glinted with a mixture of curiosity and power. "Kyle," she said softly, almost hoping her voice would carry through the trees and keep him at a distance. "You have questions," he said, his voice low, firm, and calm. "And I have answers, if you are willing to hear them." Elena hesitated. Something in his voice suggested that these answers would not be simple. They would carry weight, and perhaps danger. Still, a part of her wanted to understand, to see past the fear and glimpse the truth of him. "I want to understand," she admitted cautiously, stepping back into the cabin. "But you must tell me why you came here, why you were at my door." Kale stepped closer, and Elena felt the air shift, the tension thickening around them. "This cabin," he said, his gaze sweeping over the walls she had repaired, "was never abandoned. It has always been protected, held by forces older than any kingdom. You awakened it. And now, it calls to me, and I must answer." Elena frowned, unsure of what to say. "Awaken it? I don't understand. I'm just fixing a cabin." "No," Kale said softly, almost with regret. "You are more than that. You have touched something sacred. The forest knows, the cabin knows, and I know." For a moment, the two of them stood in silence. The wind rattled the windows, and the fire flickered, casting shadows across Kyle's face. Elena could see the weight he carried, the centuries of solitude, the loneliness hidden beneath his power. "I am cursed," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. Cursed to rule and protect, yet never to love freely. Every bond I form carries risk, and those I care for often suffer. That is why I live apart from the world, why I am feared and avoided. Elena's heart ached at the revelation. She saw in him a reflection of her own pain, the loneliness, the longing, the fear of being hurt again. And yet there was strength, a power that made her pulse quicken. "Then why come here?" she asked. "Why find me?" "Because the forest does not make mistakes," he said, stepping closer, his eyes searching hers. "And neither do I. You are not like the others. You are different. And in this difference, I sense a chance for something I thought was impossible. Redemption. Redemption." The word lingered in the air, strange and heavy. Elena did not know if she could trust it or if she should. Her life had been filled with promises that had failed, and yet something about Kyle made her want to believe. They spent the evening talking, carefully and slowly, sharing fragments of their pasts. Elena spoke of her broken marriage, the betrayal that had left her wary of others, and the long, lonely journey that had brought her to this cabin. Kyle spoke of his kingdom, the curse that bound him, and the weight of a life spent in isolation. Each word revealed layers of pain, resilience, and longing. As night fell, the forest seemed to close around them, alive with unseen eyes and whispered movements. Elena felt a pull toward him, a mixture of fear and fascination that she could not resist. Kale's presence was overwhelming and yet comforting, as if he were both protector and storm. Suddenly, a howl echoed through the trees, a sound both beautiful and terrifying. Elena froze, her eyes wide as Kale's expression changed. His jaw tightened and his body shifted slightly, muscles tense and ready. "It is the full moon tonight," he said, his voice low, almost a growl. "I must be careful. The curse, it grows stronger." Elena's heart raced. "Curse? What do you mean?" Kyle's eyes met hers, and in that moment, she saw the struggle within him. The pull of something wild and uncontrollable, the battle between man and beast. "I am bound to the forest and the moon," he said. "When it rises, I am not fully myself. My instincts take over. I do not wish to harm you, but you must understand, I cannot control it entirely." A shiver ran through Elena. The forest seemed to grow darker, the shadows stretching closer to the cabin. And yet, she did not move away. There was something in Kale's honesty, in the raw vulnerability beneath his power, that drew her closer. "Then I will stay," she said, her voice steady despite the fear. "I will not run. You cannot control the curse, but I will not leave." Kale's gaze softened, a flicker of something almost tender passing through his eyes. "You are brave," he said quietly, "and perhaps in that bravery there is hope, for both of us." The night grew deeper, and with the full moon rising high, Kyle's form began to change. His body stretched, his eyes glinting gold, and his movements became fluid, almost animalistic. Elena did not scream, she did not move away. She simply watched, captivated, as the man she had come to know transformed into something otherworldly, something both beautiful and dangerous. "I will not hurt you," Kale said, his voice a deep rumble that resonated through the cabin. "But you must trust me, even now." Elena's pulse pounded in her ears, her fear mingling with a strange exhilaration. She nodded slowly. "I trust you." For hours they remained in the cabin, the fire casting long shadows across the walls, the forest alive with movement and sound. Kyle's presence was commanding, yet protective, a paradox that left Elena both wary and drawn to him. She could feel the weight of his curse, the pull of the moon, and the power that radiated from him like heat from the hearth. By dawn, the transformation had subsided, and Cale had returned to his human form. He sat by the fire, watching Elena with eyes that seemed to hold centuries of memory and longing. "You have faced the night without fear," he said softly. "That is rare. Most would have fled." Elena smiled faintly, her hands still warm from the fire. "I have faced much worse in my life," she said, "and I have learned that running does not solve anything." Cale regarded her thoughtfully, a faint smile touching his lips. "Perhaps that is why you are different. Perhaps that is why this place chose you." The forest outside began to stir with the first light of morning. Birds called, and the river sparkled as the sun broke through the clouds. Yet within the cabin, a quiet tension remained, a bond formed in shared fear, shared courage, and the unspoken understanding of power and vulnerability. Elena knew that her life had changed forever. The cabin was no longer just a refuge. It was a threshold into a world she had never imagined, a world where power, magic, and destiny intertwined. And Cale, with all his mystery and strength, was at the center of it. As she prepared for the day, stacking firewood and checking the repairs, she felt a strange mixture of anticipation and dread. The forest held secrets, and so did Cale. And somewhere in the shadows, the curse that bound him whispered, waiting for the next choice, the next challenge, the next step in a story that was only just beginning. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the trees, Cale approached the cabin again. There was no storm this time, no howl of wolves, only his presence, calm and steady, yet impossible to ignore. "Elena," he said, his voice low and commanding, yet soft with an unfamiliar warmth. "I did not come here to frighten you. I came because you belong to more than yourself now. The forest, the cabin. They are connected to you, and to me." Elena's heart beat faster. "What do you mean?" Kyle stepped closer, the forest seeming to bend around him, shadows shifting with each movement. "You awakened something ancient," he said. "Something that will not rest until it is acknowledged, and perhaps we can face it together." Elena took a deep breath, feeling the weight of his words and the pull of the unknown. She had chosen to stay, to face the night without fear. And now she was being asked to step further into a world of power, magic, and danger. A world that promised not only fear, but a chance for connection, understanding, and perhaps even redemption. She nodded, her eyes meeting his. "Then we face it together." Cale's lips curved into the faintest smile, a mix of relief and something deeper, something that hinted at hope. "Good," he said, "because once we begin, there is no turning back." And as the moon rose once more over the forest, Elena understood that her life, her choices, and her heart had been forever changed. The cabin was no longer just a place of solitude. It was a doorway into a story that would test everything she knew about courage, love, and destiny. The Alpha King had entered her life, and with him came the power, the curse, and the promise of something she had long thought impossible, a bond that could heal, transform, and endure. The forest was quiet that morning, but the calm felt fragile, like the pause before a storm. Elena stepped out of the cabin, her hands brushing the dew-laden grass. The river glimmered faintly, reflecting the soft light of the rising sun, and the trees seemed to lean closer, as if listening. Her heart was steady, though her mind was crowded with thoughts of Cale, the Alpha King, cursed and bound to a power older than any kingdom she had known. Since his revelation of the curse and the transformation he underwent under the full moon, life in the cabin had shifted. The walls she had restored no longer felt like mere shelter. They were a space of trial, of trust, of connection. Each day brought the subtle blending of fear, fascination, and an almost electric tension she could not name. Kyle had stayed, though he kept his distance during the day, careful not to overwhelm her. Yet every glance, every presence in the shadowed corners of the forest reminded Elena that this man was not ordinary. He was a force, a storm contained in human form, and she had begun to understand that in facing him, she was confronting more than just another person. She was confronting the raw power of life itself and the vulnerability of opening one's heart to it. "Elena," Cale's voice called from the clearing, soft but commanding. She turned to see him standing there, tall, shadowed by the morning light, his eyes steady upon her. "We must speak. There is no more time to wait." She approached cautiously, aware of the weight his presence carried. The forest seemed to lean with him, the air thick and charged. "What is it?" she asked. "The curse," Kyle said, his jaw tight. "It grows stronger. The longer we wait, the harder it becomes to resist the pull of the forest, of the moon, of the power that binds me. If it is to be broken, it must be done now." Elena's chest tightened. She had hoped that the forest, the cabin, and the strange bond they shared could coexist peacefully, but it seemed destiny had other plans. "How?" she asked softly. "How can it be broken?" Cale's gaze fell to the ground for a moment, then rose with intensity. "There is a ritual, forgotten by time but remembered by the forest. It requires trust, courage, and honesty. Each of us must reveal our true selves, the wounds and fears we hide, and we must do so without hesitation or deception." Elena nodded, her hands trembling slightly. "Then we will do it." The day passed in preparation. They gathered herbs, carved symbols into the cabin's foundation, and marked a circle in the forest clearing where the ritual would be performed. The air seemed to hum with anticipation. The forest itself waiting, watching. Cale moved with a measured grace, his eyes never leaving hers, and Elena felt the gravity of their task settle around her. As night fell, the forest became alive with unseen energy. The trees whispered, and the wind carried a low murmur, almost as if the spirits of the land themselves had gathered to witness the moment. Elena stood within the circle, the fire from the cabin casting a warm glow, and Kyle mirrored her, placing himself directly opposite. "Are you ready?" he asked, his voice steady but gentle, carrying the weight of centuries and the vulnerability of a man who had rarely allowed himself to hope. "I am," Elena said, her voice firm despite the tremor in her chest. "We face it together." Cale nodded, and the ritual began. They spoke aloud their fears, their regrets, and the pain that had shaped them. Elena confessed the loneliness and betrayal of her past marriage, the way it had left her wary of others and fearful of trust. Kyle admitted the curse, the isolation he had endured for centuries, the fear that every bond he formed would bring harm to those he cared for. The forest seemed to respond to their honesty. Shadows shifted, the wind picked up, and the air vibrated with a power both beautiful and terrifying. Elena felt the magic of the cabin, the forest, and Cale himself intertwine with her own courage and determination. "Now," Cale said, his voice commanding, "we must step closer. Together. Our hearts must be open. We must trust completely." Elena took a deep breath and stepped forward, meeting him halfway in the circle. Their hands brushed, then clasped. The connection was immediate, electric, and it felt as though the forest itself pulsed in response. They closed their eyes, allowing themselves to feel the truth of their bond, the honesty and vulnerability laid bare between them. The ritual reached its peak as Kyle's body began to shift under the influence of the full moon, the wolf form threatening to emerge. But this time, Elena did not flinch. She focused on him, on the man beneath the power, the soul beneath the curse. She whispered words of trust, of courage, of acknowledgement that he was not alone. Cale's eyes, gold and wild, met hers, and in that gaze they shared everything: fear, longing, hope, and love. The curse that had held him for centuries began to weaken, its grip loosening with each heartbeat of trust they offered one another. The forest groaned and stirred, resisting and then yielding, as if the land itself acknowledged the sincerity of their bond. Hours passed, or perhaps minutes. Time lost all meaning, and finally, the transformation subsided. Kyle stood before her fully human, yet with a strength and serenity that had not been there before. The fire from the cabin lit his face, and for the first time, Elena saw him not as a storm, not as a danger, but as a man capable of hope, capable of love. "You did it," she whispered, barely believing it herself. "We did it." Cale smiled faintly, his eyes softening in a way that made her chest ache. "No," he said, "you did it. You faced the fear, embraced the unknown, and you stayed. That is what broke the curse." Elena felt a warmth spread through her chest. For so long she had lived in fear and solitude, and now she stood in a cabin restored by her own hands, in the forest alive with ancient magic, holding the hand of a man who had been bound by a curse for centuries. She realized that in facing him, she had also faced herself. They stepped closer, the forest around them quiet, respectful. Cale took her hands in his, holding them gently. "Elena," he said, his voice a low murmur, "you are brave, stronger than anyone I have ever known. And you have given me something I thought I could never have: trust, and perhaps even love." Her heart skipped, a thrill of emotion coursing through her. "I trusted you," she said softly, "because I had to, because I wanted to. And now, I see that even in fear, even in uncertainty, there is hope." Cale's fingers brushed against hers, tentative yet certain. "Then let us face this future together," he said. "No longer bound by curses, no longer alone. Whatever the forest, the cabin, or destiny holds, we will face it side by side." Elena nodded, feeling a profound sense of peace she had never known. The cabin, once a symbol of her solitude, now felt alive with possibility. The forest, once a place of whispers and shadows, seemed to sing softly in the background. And Cale, no longer merely a figure of power and danger, was a man she could reach, touch, and stand beside. They returned to the cabin, where the hearth burned bright, casting warmth across the wooden walls. For the first time in years, Elena felt that she belonged, not just in a place, but in a connection that was real, honest, and transformative. Over the following days, life in the cabin settled into a rhythm that was both ordinary and extraordinary. They repaired what remained of the cabin together, shared meals by the fire, and walked through the forest side by side. The bond between them deepened, built on trust, understanding, and the knowledge that they had faced ancient forces together. Cale taught Elena about the forest, its magic, and the balance of power that had once bound him. She, in turn, shared her own strength, her resilience, and the courage that had brought her to this place. Each day they discovered more about one another, not in grand declarations but in the quiet moments. The way he watched her work, the way she laughed at his dry humor, the small gestures that spoke of care and attention. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the trees, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Cale took Elena to the edge of the river. The forest was still, the water smooth like glass. "Do you feel it?" he asked, his voice gentle. "The forest. It has acknowledged us. It has accepted our choice, our bond. We are free now, not only from the curse, but from the fear that once held us apart." Elena nodded, feeling the truth in his words. She reached for his hand, and together they watched the sun disappear behind the horizon, the first stars appearing in the velvet sky. "I never imagined," she said softly, "that I could find something like this after everything I've been through, that I could find peace, and perhaps even love." Cale turned to her, his expression serious yet tender. "You deserve it," he said. "We both do, and now we have a choice: to live in the light of what we have found and to protect it together." Elena felt a warmth spread through her, a mixture of joy, relief, and anticipation. She had faced fear, embraced the unknown, and emerged stronger. And now, with Cale by her side, she knew that whatever the future held, they would face it as equals, partners, and perhaps something more. As night fell, they returned to the cabin, the fire burning bright, the forest alive with the gentle hum of life. They stood together on the porch, hand in hand, watching the stars appear one by one, feeling the weight of the past lift, replaced by the promise of a shared future. And though the forest remained vast, mysterious, and full of secrets, Elena knew one truth above all. She was no longer alone. She had reclaimed herself, the cabin, and a connection that had the power to heal, transform, and endure. The Alpha King had entered her life, and together they had faced fear, embraced trust, and broken the chains of an ancient curse. The forest whispered its approval, the cabin radiated warmth, and the bond between Elena and Kyle glowed with the promise of hope, courage, and love. In the quiet of the night, with the stars above and the river murmuring nearby, Elena realized that she had not only restored a cabin, but had also restored a part of herself, and in doing so, had found a man who would stand with her through every shadow and every light. Their journey had begun in fear and solitude, but it had ended in choice, in trust, and in a bond that would endure beyond the forest, beyond the cabin, and beyond the limits of what either of them had thought possible. The forest sighed softly in the night, and for the first time, Elena felt the pure, unbroken peace of belonging, at last, truly home.